In today's episode of Habit Chess, I want to talk to you about something that I think is on all of our minds, which is what are the skills of the future? If everything can be built and automated and outsourced, what is left for us to do? Especially in that between time where we're not just working 3.5 days a week and getting paid the same, but maybe our skill has been replaced. And now we have to figure out what are the ones that are still being paid for and generating value. And so that's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking deeply about, because we're at a point in time where there's a big flip that's happened. The World Economic Forum recently released after their conference or whatever in 2025 that the skills that are going to be in demand by 2030 are going to change by up to 39%. The skills are not going to be as technical as they once were because those things are able to be done, right? Math can be solved pretty crazily. Coding can be solved pretty amazingly. And so what's left is more of these softer skills, these human-centric skills is what they've called it. And there's a pretty staggering amount of us. And it's not like any of us are safe from this, right? Because 50% of employees are going to need reskilling by 2025. That was their prediction. And I think that they're pretty on track with that, which is this year, if you're not spending time learning new skills and things that you think will stack and combine with your existing ones to make them more unique and make them flourish, make them more valuable, then that gap is going to only continue to get further and further. The way that I think about it is when typing first came out, the typewriter, right? And then now being able to type on a computer. If you didn't put time into doing that, the gap just got harder and harder and harder, especially as computers were now everywhere. Especially in grocery stores, like if you needed to apply to something, you had to use a computer. So there are some core skills this year, it feels like, where, hey, if we don't pick up on these things, we're getting left behind. And I think it's actually relieving to know that it's not going to be just the technical skills that I go through today. So there's 11 skills that I'm going to cover that I believe will always be in demand. And I'm going to give you some examples on how you can maybe stack them. You've probably heard of Salesforce, which is one of the biggest tech companies in the world. This year, they did not hire any software engineers because they believed that the agents would be able to perform this more productively and effectively. Instead, what they did was they hired 2,000 new salespeople to help sell agents. And what this does is it tells you, okay, it's not just that sales is a skill that is still valuable, right? It is showing us this massive shift where software engineering was considered like the pinnacle of value creation, right? You might be working for a tech company, you might be working for a new and hot startup, you can really build anything that you want. And coding was the skill that we were told growing up, like that's what you need to learn, that's where the future is. But now that that skill has been solved, it opens up a whole new world of what is possible. And that is why this video is really important for us to cover today. The skills that we're going to dive into, I truly believe are ones where if you put time into acquiring them, you're going to stand out pretty crazily. A quick way to think about it is like this. We've all been around people that are brilliant, right? Let's say they're a doctor, super smart, super impactful. But let's now say that doctor has terrible bedside manner, right? They're very rude. It makes you almost cringe when you are around them or you hear them talk. And what does that do? That dampens the impact that doctor might have. Sure, they're super smart and they're brilliant, but just being around that person makes them harder to work with. And in today's world where people are replaceable, skills are replaceable, you have to be really, really good in order for some place to tolerate, bad attitude and things that just make it hard for people to work around you. I think that's one thing that we're going to be trending towards now, which is you need to contribute to a workplace where you're making other people's lives easier around you. If you are the person that is bringing drama and you are really hard to work with, now in the age of AI, there is always somebody that is going to be, a little less drama-free that is willing to kind of replace that spot. When CEOs like Zuckerberg and Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan and Chase are asked things like, what should we learn? What are the skills of the future? What should our kids be studying in school? The answer that they give now is very different than what we got when we were growing up around coding and technology. They're saying basically, learn how to learn. That is the meta skill that is worth learning, because go deep on one thing, yes, but when Zuckerberg clarifies or why he said that, it's because when you've gone on something pretty deep, it shows that you have kind of learned the art of learning. And that skill of learning how to learn transfers across other disciplines, across other domains pretty effectively. The scary part of this answer is that it shows a little bit around how we don't know. There's no guaranteed skill of the future. The one guarantee that there is will be that, hey, we need to learn new things. There are going to be new skills that pop up. They need to be learned and they need to be mastered very quickly. The answer of, oh, I don't know how to do that. I haven't done that before. That's not a good enough answer anymore, right? Nobody is going to expect that in the workplace. It's just like if something is Googleable, you don't want to say, oh, I don't know the answer to that. You just go, okay, I'll figure it out and I'll get back to you. And then you go Google it. And then, you come back with what you've learned. But before we go any deeper, let's talk about what exactly is a skill. For this discussion, a skill is a developed ability that's used deliberately to solve problems, create opportunities, or outcomes. Now that we've covered that, let's dive into the 11 timeless skills that will always be in demand. Number 1 is high agency. The reason I believe high agency is such an in-demand skill is because this is the kind of person that doesn't need to be told exactly what to do. They have already thought about what to do and they have taken action before you even have a chance to tell them, hey, this is what I think you should do. They come back to you and they've already thought through 10 different ways to solve the problem and again have just taken action. And usually that is so rare because people are waiting for instruction. They're waiting for answers before they act. And so when you have somebody who is high agency, it is very easy to spot them. They are not the ones that are waiting for life to kind of happen to them. They are making life happen for them. And so somebody who is very low agency on the other end of the spectrum is going to be someone who's just waiting for things to change. And that is something that in today's day and age, if you are high agency, it is very easy to stand out. And when you couple that with anything, whether you are in sanitation services or you are in big tech, that is a trait and a skill that really makes you stand out no matter what you do. The reason I highlight high agency as number 1 is because if you don't believe that your life can change and that you can make things happen for yourself and you can shape or create outcomes, then none of the tools that have become available to us that are as revolutionary as when the internet first came out actually matters, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if everything can be automated and done because you may not believe that you are able to participate in that. You may not believe that it's going to work for you. So remember, people who take initiative and solve problems are going to be indispensable. An action step is to pick one area of your life. It doesn't have to be really big. It can be very small, but it can be something that you've been waiting for someone else to take the first step, right? You've been waiting for an opportunity to arrive or something to happen for you. And instead you go, no, I'm going to do something about that today. I'm going to put in an input, no matter how small, towards it. And doing tiny things like that is how you begin to even show yourself, oh, wow, I am a high agency person. And that belief alone of knowing that you are high agency goes a long way. The second skill that I believe will always be in demand is skill acquisition. And this is simply learning how to learn. So if you have the capability to pick a skill up in 5 minutes, 10 hours, that person becomes very valuable because there's someone else who's like, wait, I got to go back to school for 4 years to learn the same thing. Or hold on, I need to do this for 10 years before I feel like I'll be ready to do this thing. The person that can learn something very quickly, and not perfection either, like to a good enough degree, I think will be rewarded because there will be so many new things to learn that the very vulnerability that we have to go through when we are learning something new is going to be, uncomfortable for a lot of people. We have to be beginners when we have kind of chased our whole life to be an expert at something and be safe from change and be able to continue to be that expert in that domain. No matter what we do, that might be getting flipped on its head right now. And so things when you think about skill acquisition, struggle is really what comes to mind, right? When you're learning something new, you are going to fail. You are going to struggle. And these things are not comfortable, especially if you're coming from a field or a skill set where you mastered it for 10 years, 20 years, and you weren't ready for this. The beautiful thing about this is that it's not standardized anymore. It's not like to learn how to learn, you need to go back and get your master's before, somebody gives you the permission to be able to do that. It's now about figuring out, how do you actually pick up skills? If the knowledge is everywhere, if you can Google it, it's on YouTube, you can ask ChatGPT. Now it becomes about putting ourselves out there, right? Because research has shown that exposing yourself to struggle in the learning process is actually more effective in long-term retention than repetition. So just repeating, the same thing and practicing the same shot is not really as effective as if you put yourself through the struggle and frustration on an acute level of not making that shot and of figuring out how to correct your way, figure out how to self-correct and, let that struggle kind of shape some of the error correction that is going to happen. And so the way that you can implement this is by picking a skill that you have always wanted to learn. You've always wanted to do this, and it might stack very well with something that you are already doing right now. Begin to invest 5 to 10 minutes a day towards that, right? So it doesn't have to be the 5-hour version or, the night school version of this. Literally 5 to 10 minutes a day. What is it like for you to begin to even research that skill and familiarize with some of the things that you need to be learning about? So that's one way to begin this process and begin practicing skill acquisition, is pick something that you want to learn, right? It can be something that will have an immediate impact in your personal life or professional life. That's usually what makes us motivated to learn in the first place. So this is your chance at doing so in a way where you're not being handed a curriculum and being told to learn these things that may not make sense to you or may not actually apply to some of the end result things that you want to apply this to. So that's the funnest part of this skill, is that skill acquisition is going to look different. Learning is going to look different. It's not just going to be the way that it's been done for the last 100 years. There are going to be so many different models of learning that are happening based on how quickly we got to move and the problems we got to solve. The third skill that is going to be increasingly in demand is saying no. And the reason for this is because it's so easy to say yes, right? We're served more options and more questions than ever before. Every third post on Instagram is an ad, right? It's a sponsored post. You have to actively turn down, if you're scrolling 100 posts, right? You've got to turn down 30 times. No, 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 don't want this, no, no. And so just like ads being served to you and having to kind of say, no, I'm not interested in this, that happens all day, every day, no matter what screen you're looking at, no matter what application you are using. It is everywhere. The reason this skill is important is because if you don't get good at it, then by default, you'll say yes to everything and you never really get to control some of the outcomes that you want. So a way to put this into action is by asking yourself, what are 1 to 3 things that I can say no to today that will create the space for me to say yes to some of the things I want to double down on? Because oftentimes it's not about adding more, it's about figuring ways to remove some of the junk that is already there so that what we want to say yes to has space to flourish. If you can say no, it is a skill that shows that you know how to focus and you really respect yourself and your time. You know how to set boundaries. In a world where we will have access and options to work on anything we possibly want, it becomes really important to say no to almost anything that comes your way that doesn't excite you, because you can't waste your time on stuff that is not a really hard yes. And practicing the skill of saying no is the first step to being able to do that, to being able to say yes and act on those opportunities when they come. The people who move the fastest on some of that is mostly because they've said no to a lot of things. They've said no to a lot of things, which makes it very easy to say yes when the opportunities arise. The fourth skill that is going to be timeless and always in demand is time investing. The reason I believe this will always be around is because it is a finite resource. You have money and you have a lot of investing vehicles around that, right? You've got entire industries and titles that serve the investing of money, and that's renewable, right? So now if you look at the resource that is not renewable, we have not looked at time as something we can trade, something we can invest, something that can bring us outsized returns for the same thing. We just don't look at it the same way. And it's something that is going to be spent down to zero every single day anyways. So why not focus on intentionally allocating a certain space for it? The reason time investing is going to be so valuable is because it's not just about working hard anymore. You could work really hard at the wrong problem, but if that wasn't the right move for you that you needed to invest time towards, it's not really going to go that far. Right? So one of the things that I encourage you to do is look at everything as input or output. And so the things that we want out of our time is usually a result of a lot of tiny inputs. And so for 3+ years now, I've been tracking my time for every work-related activity. I have a Notion time tracking template, and every month I reset it so it starts fresh. But it's kind of crazy now. I have over 3 years of data of any time, any work task I begin or switch tasks, I hit new, and it kind of creates a new cell, and it becomes kind of like this journal or time log where I can go back and look at, oh wow, this year I didn't do that much, clearly here's why, or look at how much I produced this year and here's exactly why. These are the inputs that went into that. So that's number one. Download that. That's in the description below. There's been hundreds of people that have downloaded it and they found it useful. I think that is a way that you can begin to gamify this process, and it will go a long way, because how you allocate this is such an individual single player game, because we all start with different responsibilities and things that we have to be allocating our time to in the first place. And so usually it comes back to like 1 or 2 solid hours at most that a lot of us have that we can invest into something that's truly of our own choosing that allows us to move forward. And those aren't the things that, you know, feel urgent or like we should be working on it right now. It's the stuff you know is important, you should work on, but months have gone by and you haven't made moves towards that. So another tool that I actually made, I started out making this for, you know, just myself and my wife, and we've been using it every single day. It's basically the world's first stopwatch where you can rename the laps and you can plan, track, and share your task times with other people. So it's lapless.io. If you want to check it out, it's totally free. Use it. Let me know what you think of it. I think it's really a great tool for helping you focus. It's kind of the stopwatch that I wish I had for like 6-7 years. And in that time, nobody has really built one. So I decided to make one myself. Check the link out for that in the description below as well, or just go straight to lapless.io. The 5th skill is writing. And the reason I mention writing is because you know how they say writing is basically thinking, right? It's good thinking. You think to write and you write to think. And so even if we enter a world like, you know, those meta glasses where you can kind of just think of something and it's like, oh, cool, it's coming up on the screen now. Even if that physical act of writing goes away where you can just think something into existence, writing is still that skill. So when a stand-up comedian who doesn't really, you know, write out their jokes, they go up on stage, it's still called writing on stage. They write on stage in the moment. They've got stuff in their head and they're basically putting that out there. And so it still is a reflection of good thinking, because if it's not, then it wouldn't work, right? And so remember, the whole point of writing is clarifying, structuring, sequencing, and thinking is very synonymous with that. And clear thinkers are always rewarded, right? So if you can think clearly about a product, a service, a problem, it goes a long way. And for the foreseeable future, writing is the core foundation of everything that we do, whether it is, you know, a resume that you're filling out, whether it is, you know, a follow-up email, whether it is video scripts or social posts or anything, right? Text messages and emails, they all start out in some way. All these important pieces of media that we're trying to make, whether you are a business owner and you're doing it for yourself, like videos, newsletters, social media posts, things like that, or whether you are a professional and you are, you know, you need to have your LinkedIn updated. You need to have a good resume. When you apply to different jobs, you need to conduct yourself well, right? When you're communicating with the people who are in charge of those opportunities, like, your words matter and they go a long way. How you say something makes a difference. If you can write something effectively, you can get the machines to build something really effectively, right? There's a lot of no-code tools and apps where if you can now give the right prompt, the machinery is fully capable of giving you the perfect response back. It's mostly the fact that we just haven't figured out how to ask some of the right questions and in a way where these machines can hear it. So that becomes the real problem to solve over time, is how great are we at writing to communicate with each other and to also communicate with these machines that are in charge of a lot of our future. A way to put this into action is by starting to write for yourself. So you don't need to publish right away. Begin to capture 10 notes a day, okay? 10 ideas a day. They can be bullets, okay? They can be 10 words or less. And that's the fun part, is like the writing doesn't need to be so formulaic and perfect and what might be coming into mind as I'm telling you about this. The writing can be capturing a couple words. Because remember, coming back to that comedian example, when a comedian captures their jokes, a lot of times it's not word for word. They know how it might go to make it word for word, but it's a couple words on their set list that reminds them, oh, right, this is that joke, right? This is what I meant. This is what I was referring to. So these ideas that you captured throughout the day, you're doing so you can have unlimited ideas that you can refer back to and train this skill of writing. But I think really what we're training is the noticing muscle. When you start to capture 10 things per day, your brain is forced to notice things and look for things and make connections and figure out stuff that it wants to care about. So I think this is a practice that can go a long way. It's very accessible and it's free, right? Unlike making this YouTube video or something, there's more involved, but with writing, you can literally do it with just your phone and your notes app or with a pen and paper or whatever you need, to make it enjoyable for yourself. If nothing else, use writing as a tool to connect with yourself better and look at yourself as an instrument. You want to be able to play yourself like an instrument in the most optimal way. So the more you understand the instrument, you'll know how to play it. You'll know what strings to pluck and which chords to go after. This leads into the sixth skill, which is speaking. The reason I mention speaking is because Warren Buffett said the most valuable money that he spent was on a $100 or $200 communications course that was really helping you be a better speaker. And this is something that was, $200 in his time, maybe a couple $1,000s or something like that. But think about all the knowledge, all the books that Warren has read and knowledge he's acquired. And he points to that communication course as a thing that had the biggest impact. And I remember hearing that when I was younger, and it never left me because it was always something that I connected with. I was like, oh yeah, I'm afraid to express my ideas or talk. I started my very first podcast when I was 22. I was pretty afraid to express my own ideas on my own show. If you listen to those earlier episodes, I would throw the questions back to the guests so fast because I didn't want the attention to be on me. I even, to get over this fear, did stand-up comedy for 4 years because I really wanted to figure out, how do I get over this block where it feels like I have this idea that I want to express, but I don't have the words, the tools, the language to get it across. And so if you can figure that skill out, which, if I can to some extent, anybody can, because, my starting point was very, very rough. Now, when it comes to speaking, I'm not just talking about public speaking and speaking on stage. I'm talking more so about being able to speak like yourself. So Miles Davis, the world famous jazz musician, has said that it took me years to sound like myself. And what that really means is that nobody just starts out sounding like who they want to be. They have people in mind that they admire and emulate. And over time, that blended with their uniqueness, forms its own voice. So that's really what you're after, is how do I sound more like myself in writing, on camera, in meetings, on stage? Because if you master that element of presentation, which, by the way, I'm an introvert and you do not need to be extroverted to be able to do this. You can pull it off if you put enough time and attention towards this skill. This really just comes back to the idea that no matter how great your idea is, it doesn't really matter if nobody can understand it or if you can't communicate those ideas. A quick action step for this, if you want to implement it, is taking your camera out. This is not going to be for content, by the way, but you're going to explain an idea that you have in mind, trying to do it in 60 to 90 seconds. And the idea is to just really quick on your feet, thinking of the topic or the concept or the idea, and then trying to sequence it, trying to know, how do I start this? What's my hook? What's my middle? What am I getting across here? And then How do I exit? What's my ending to get out of this? I found that this exercise allows the person practicing to get really comfortable speaking on camera and get really comfortable hearing themselves talk in a place where there's no pressure, right? You're not on, in front of a million people. You're not at work. You're not in any scenarios where there's a real threat. You're just in front of your own camera, and you can delete it at any time. The seventh skill is storytelling. You've probably heard this everywhere and for years and years, but this is becoming more and more true because it's never mattered less what is actually true, but it's never mattered more what you think is true. So if you think something is true because of a story that you heard, right, or a narrative that has been formed, I mean, that's it, right? It's hard to convince somebody and talk them out of it once a story has convinced them that this is how it is. This skill becomes increasingly powerful to not just be able to protect yourself, but also be able to give justice to the ideas that you have. The fact that our brains need story in order to make sense of things has not changed, and it will not change. So this skill is something that becomes crazy important because whether you're using it in your personal life, which is always great, or in your professional life, this is a skill that when you combine with sales, when you combine with writing or speaking, it can take that and be a launch pad to take you to a completely new level. To put this into action, the ABS structure is something that I really love, which there's so many great story structures I've discovered over the years, but this is a simple one that you can take with you. A stands for and, B stands for but, and S stands for so. So the A is really this and that. You're giving context. The but is what introduces conflict. When we hear the word but, it makes your brain go, oh, what's coming? What's next, right? So you can introduce conflict in the story. And then you've got the so, which is basically tying it together and the resolution. And so you can kind of deliver a 10-minute or an hour-long talk going through this repetitive structure. If you really analyze some of the most effective talks, they probably open and close these loops several times throughout the duration of that talk. And then of course, there's probably a larger version of the and but so, okay, that we started the talk with this. Somewhere in the middle, we have the bigger conflict, and then at the end we have the resolution. But many times you've got many versions of this that make it up throughout that as well. So the ABS structure is not only a way for you to kind of craft a narrative, a bigger narrative using this, but you can also use it to craft stories. And those little stories are what add up to make up that bigger narrative. The eighth skill that will be in demand is judgment. The reason I believe this is important to highlight is because you hear about how problem solving is something that will be in demand, right? People who can solve problems. But I still think that skill is too big. It's too broad. It's not specific enough, right? What is problem solving, good problem solving actually made up of? Well, one of the core components of that is judgment. If you have great judgment, that is a skill that can be practiced and you are rewarded for it heavily. That's what executives and CEOs are paid a disproportionate amount of money for, right? It's decisions that they're making. But why are they trusted with these decisions? It's because we believe them to have good judgment. You may have heard this quote from Naval, which is that leverage is a force multiplier for your judgment. So if you have great judgment in today's day and age where everything is at our fingertips, that can be amplified in an awesome way. But if you have bad judgment, everything's at our fingertips and it doesn't take long for you to also amplify those effects. In a world full of uncertainty, being able to sort through options and make decisions based on good judgment is going to be invaluable. And its value is only going to increase under fearful, fast, or unfamiliar conditions. A way to put this into action is by taking a look at a decision that you made. It could be a big one or a small one, but look at something that you've made recently. Okay, so not one that you're going to make, but look at one that you made recently and that there's been enough time where you can see how that decision has panned out. Did it work out how it thought you would? What were some of the unexpected things that arised from this? If you can take a look back at some of your judgment and decisions and be honest around what worked, what didn't, that reflection process, that feedback loop of just being aware and honest enough to sit with that, because it is uncomfortable at times, right? We don't want to look back at decisions that didn't work out, right? But if you can do that, I find that to be the very thing that continues to train good judgment. The ninth skill that will be in demand is going to be emotional intelligence. This is very apparent when you either see it in action or when it's missing from action, right? The doctor example that I gave at the beginning of this video that has terrible bedside manner, very rude, coworkers don't want to be around this person, right? Patients don't want to be around this person. That is not a good vibe and energy to bring around. And the emotional intelligence aspect is shown where it's like IQ used to be really important, right? And because you were really smart, you could get away with maybe not having a lot of EQ. Research shows that EQ accounts for 58% of success across all job types, making it a better predictor of success than just purely IQ alone. If you think about teams everywhere across all companies, they are very careful about who to let in, right? You don't want to let somebody in who's going to make the rest of the team leave or make their lives miserable, right? Because that's a very expensive challenge for companies. So being emotionally intelligent, knowing what to say, what not to say, when to say it, having that kind of awareness is crazy important, because I found that as we get older, you have less and less people in your life that are just going to tell you straight up, hey, this is a situation where you are not demonstrating good EQ. That doesn't happen as much. A lot of times, if you're not somebody who has great emotional intelligence, you'll be phased out and people won't say anything. So developing the skill is really important to even just apply it to yourself, not even to other people, but to apply it to yourself, to have the awareness to go, okay, where are my high impact areas? Where are some of my weaknesses? Can I accurately even answer that question? Right? Because if you can, that's when it feels scary. You're like, oh, my judgment's off. I can't accurately diagnose what I need to work on. So put simply, be easy and enjoyable to be around. And that means a lot more in today's day and age than just being the smartest person in the room. The 10th timeless skill is movement. I spent over a decade coaching fitness to clients, not just on site and in person, but in the tail end of my fitness career, I got to work with clients in over 14 plus countries. A lot of these people were Fortune 1000 executives, professional athletes, military and first responders. And my specialty was really helping people come back stronger after their injuries. And this really was personal to me because when I was 19, I herniated a disc in my lower back, L5-S1, and it put me out of commission for a good year and a half. And my job was very active and I got to feel the effects of like, whoa, this is what happens when movement is taken away from you. Simple things like vacuuming or taking my feet in and out of the car were very difficult. And, it made me feel like I was 100 years old. And it made me really look at movement and training very differently than, how I was viewing it before. The reason that I list this as an in-demand skill is because it will always be in demand for us personally. We'll always need to open jars, get up and down, open doors, find our balance, avoid falling on our face or on our head. There's all sorts of things that without movement, any other skill that you stack on top of it all of a sudden is less enjoyable if your movement is limited. To me, I also believe it's one of the most powerful medicines that mankind has access to. It's the one thing that when you move, it's a domino that makes all the other dominoes easier to deal with. So all of a sudden you feel like drinking more water. You feel like eating a little better. You feel like getting to bed on time. And these things are all stuff that would be difficult to do on its own. But for whatever reason, when you start moving, you start doing it more, you start doing it consistently, a lot of these other things begin to happen a little more naturally. And jokingly, you probably heard how in 5 years, a fit body is going to be rarer than a Rolex. And if that is actually true, if there's any truth to that, it goes to show you how we're moving into a world where more and more of our day is in front of a screen, sitting down. And as Naval says, health is something that can't be bought, right? It's one of those three things that has to be earned. And so this is a skill that's worth unlocking for yourself very early on, because it only becomes more and more valuable as we age. It does not depreciate in value whatsoever, no matter who you are. The 11th skill that will always be in demand is engineering. And no, I do not mean mechanical, software, biomechanical, chemical engineers in the traditional sense, like the title. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about engineering as a way to design outcomes, right? Looking at it as a way where you can skillfully arrange a situation or an outcome to occur. In a world of uncertainty and increased complexity, if you can reverse engineer things and you can really kind of figure out how to sequence things to make a certain outcome happen, that skill will always be in demand no matter what job you're in, what field you're in. That skill will always be called upon, and someone needs to step up to the plate for that. It's also the kind of thing that's gonna be valuable in our personal lives, right? So engineering can be about arranging people, events, knowledge, resources, and situations to achieve certain outcomes. The way to practice this is by picking an outcome, right? So it could be a goal that you want, something you'd like to achieve, and now reverse engineer it, deconstruct it in all the micro steps, all the tiny things that would need to go into making this bigger thing happen. For example, when I built Lapless.io, I had this vision in mind of a stopwatch where I wanted to rename the laps, but then there were all these smaller things that I had to break it up into in order to make what you see now. And then of course, as we layer on top of that, right, there are a lot of small prompts and components and actions that go into making this simple stopwatch do its thing. So if there's one thing to take away from this video, it is the fact that the world values outcomes. So knowing how to code is a skill, yes, but it is not contributing to an outcome by default. You need someone to apply that coding skill in an efficient way. Okay, we're going to build this feature. We're going to build this new tool. This skill is going to be applied towards creating this outcome. And that's why I believe that these 11 skills we went over are the real differentiators now. Because if you combine the skill of coding with 3 to 5 of the skills that we talked about today, that person looks like a completely different individual than the one who is like, hey, I'm the best coder, give me something to work on. The great news is you don't need to master all of these at once. You can begin to do 1 or 2 at a time, and really it's about stacking them in strategic ways. Using the coding example, if you were somebody that had coding as a core skill, you still needed somebody to communicate what this does or to sell it for you, right? Or to weave a narrative and, write about it, speak about it, do all of those things. And the person who was a salesperson, right, needed a product to sell. They couldn't build something themselves, maybe. And so it all of a sudden becomes accessible to become a complete package if you want to. Before, you might have had to partner up with a co-founder. I might be the CEO and you might be the CTO. Okay, you're the technical person, I'm the face of the brand. That no longer has to be true, right? One person can be the complete package if they figure out some of these skills and how to stack them. What I love about every single skill that we covered today is that each one has the potential to compound into something extraordinary and unrecognizable if you give it the space to. No matter what you do for work, no matter if it's your personal or professional life, these skills in one way or another show up and manifest in those goals. And if you refine and practice them, these are the skills that will make some of the core things really, really flourish and stand out. So drop a comment. Let me know what you got out of this episode. What was the thing that made things click for you? You can also email me hi@habitchess.com. I always love hearing from people. But if you're the kind of person that watched this video and you made it this far, you're going to do great things. You're going to go a long way. And I'm honored that you chose to spend your time with me today. So thanks for hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.